Alright, so I took the El Bandito out on a ride on Monday, I believe. Yeah, so 6 days ago. Today's Sunday. And it was kind of a mixed bag. So I was surprised at actually how well it ran in certain parts. One of the things that happened, it took a long time to warm up, like well over 10 minutes before I could actually get the full choke off. And that wasn't just because of messing with the idle mixture, or not the idle mixture, but the idle set screw. So I wanted to do some thinking about this instead of just tearing everything apart, clearing up the carburetors, making sure all that's clean again, because that's kind of what I've been doing. I've been doing a lot of thinking this week on what might actually be the problem. And one of the things that was weird, one, I believe that I set the floats too conservative. I believe I'm shutting the fuel off a little bit too early, because it actually seemed to affect it when I kicked it off of the center stand. And the major one, and the one I've been trying to avoid this whole time, kind of because I forgot about it, because I'm not too used to these Suzukis, and the other because it's a stupid thing. This has a pair valve on it. And a pair valve is something that was put on here to help these bikes pass US emissions. It says it's something that does nothing for the performance of the bike. What it does is it injects clean air into the exhaust to try to burn unburned fuel that may make it pass on deceleration and lower idle revs on the engine. So that's one thing I was looking at. After looking at a lot of diagrams, reading a lot of forum posts, I'm also seeing I'm missing 2 breather hoses from the carburetors for the float bowls. Now those shouldn't actually affect anything. I'll show you what it is, but those are 2 things that were missing on this bike. And the vacuum-operated petcock is also another worry in the potential that, depending on where the revs are, the way that the vacuum works, this thing may not be getting enough fuel. So I am going to take the tank back off this. I'm going to take the tank and the seat back off, and we'll get into that. But I'm going to kind of storyboard a little bit and actually give this more thought than I normally do, because normally I just want to get in there with a wrench and start screwing with everything, and then I don't know what I'm actually doing. I'm going to try to give this a more of an academic approach this time, but I'll still we'll see. Let's see what we can do. Okay, so instead of just tearing the bike, we're actually going to walk here to a different spot and try to figure out if we can figure this out on a whiteboard as opposed to just changing a bunch of things. So one of the things I've been pulling the little bit of hair I have left out to is actually the vacuum. I think this may actually be a vacuum issue on this bike and not just a straight up carburetor issue. Now, there's a couple different places where that you could pull vacuum from an engine. What I believe that we're looking at on a motorcycle is a ported vacuum, not a manifold vacuum. So a manifold vacuum, this would be on the valve intake area, whereas this ported vacuum, this area here, this would be the carburetor. So I believe we're looking at a ported vacuum here. So this is going to play into diagnosing what I believe may be an issue with the pair valve. And the pair valve is just something that has been put on these bikes to help with emissions and burn unburnt gases. Now I can show you on the bike in a little bit, but I just wanted to point this out on these diagrams. This is what the pair valve assembly looks like, and it's this large piece, and it sends a hose of clean, unburnt, or just basically filtered air to the exhaust valves, exhaust ports on each of the 4 cylinders. So it's a pretty large piece. There's a lot of hose. There's a lot that goes with this. Most people say you can remove this thing without any performance issues, and actually, that makes sense to me. But I'm going to see if we can do this without having to remove it. My question is whether or not there's actually an issue with the existing pair valve that's on it. And so what I'll probably end up doing is disabling it without removing it completely. But basically, I just wanted to show that there is this pair valve that's got these 4 hoses, 1 to each cylinder head near the outlet. And if you wanted to remove this, you need to get block-off blocks, I guess. Basically, if you just remove this whole thing, you'd have a couple holes in the exhaust. All right, so these need to be blocked off. But we're not going to be removing it. We're going to see if we can just completely disable it, or, heck, I'll try it with it on first, see how it runs best. So my understanding of what a pair valve, or what pair stands for, is pulsed air injection, and then I'm not sure what the R is, but I'm going to guess from all my searches is that it's just remove. Because basically, if you have this thing on, and you put on any type of performance exhaust or anything that's not stock, especially if it does not have a catalytic converter, it just screws a whole bunch of things up. It doesn't offer you any performance upgrades, and it's depending on how big the thing is on your bike, it could be 3 to 10 pounds, and it has a whole bunch of hoses and everything, and it makes it much harder to work on the bike. Pairs are found on a lot of Suzuki engines, so it's not just the Bandit that we're looking at. You can find them on Katanas, GSXRs, Hayabusa, however the hell you say it. And I believe you can find a similar system on other Japanese manufacturers. I don't know if it's called pair, but they may have their own acronym or whatever they want to call it. So what we're going to do, I'm going to try to explain what the pair does and how I think that we can either disable it or correct it or connect it correctly, because I don't think it's set up right now correctly, which may explain why I'm experiencing in first gear or idle a wandering kind of a wandering idle, like it's not consistent. The other thing I noticed on that little test ride was first gear was extremely sluggish. They had a ton of throttle lag. Like you'd pull on the throttle and then you could wait a second and then it'd start kicking in. As soon as you got to second and third gear, the bike felt like it was perfect. So I only got it up to about 6,000 RPMs. Unfortunately, it was nighttime, and because I don't have all the insurance for this, I didn't really want to go anywhere around just around my block. But we're going to see how it idles on the pair, probably disabled. That's probably going to be my best choice if I have the right stuff to disable it. If I don't, then we're just going to hook it up correctly. The issue is that this pair valve may have failed, and I have no way of testing that. Well, let me explain how it works. All right, so taking a look at this, what we have is an air box, and then the air box is going to be connected to your 4 carburetors. The 4 carburetors are going to mix fuel inside of them, and they will send them to the 4 cylinders. After the 4 cylinders have gone through each one of their power strokes, they will send out the exhaust, and then it will leave the motorcycle. And that is how the engine is supposed to work. However, this thing was added to sort of cheat emissions. Now, there's a way you could spin this into that, yes, this does unburn some unburnt gases and blah, 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 blah. It's kind of, it's really iffy. This is the pair valve is kind of a cheat to the way that they test these bikes, these engines for emissions. So just to explain what's happening here, unfortunately I could only find 3 colors. I just ran around my whole house trying to find a green, but I couldn't find a green. Anyway, so what's going to happen is that my dotted line here, this is going to be fuel. Okay, so fuel is going to come when that petcock's on. Okay, you got fuel into 4, 3, 2, and 1. And then that fuel is going to mix with air and go to each of the cylinders. We'll get the air in a second. All right, air's going to be blue. Okay, clean air from our air filter air box. All right, so we got air coming in. Now, mixes inside of the carbs, and now you've got your air-fuel mixture going to each of the cylinders. That mixture is going to be ignited by the spark plug, and what you'll have is the exhaust gases going out, and now they're gone. All right, keep repeating. However, there could be some unburnt fuel in the exhaust. This could trip, different emissions types things. So what they came up with is what is called this pair valve. Now, how this pair valve works is it's vacuum operated. Now, on each one of these carburetors, we have, where I was mentioning on that ported vacuum before, each one of these carburetors is pulling a vacuum at, it pulls a different amount of vacuum during depends on where the throttle position is, but they are pulling a vacuum. One of those is going to operate that petcock that I was struggling with earlier, the one that was jammed. So normally the petcock is closed. Okay, it's a normally closed valve. However, when you start pulling suction, or when you start moving air through the carburetors, they end up pulling a vacuum. What that does is it pulls that diaphragm open, and it allows fuel to get to the carburetor bowls and eventually into the air-fuel mixture. What we're going to do is, on this bike, carb 1 and carb 2 are plugged off. We do not use the vacuums on 1 and 2. Carb 4 is used for the petcock. One of the things I've been struggling with, and I still don't have an answer to it, is whether or not it matters that carb 4 and carb 3, because cylinder 3 and cylinder 4 are going to be 180 degrees out of phase. That is, when carb 1 when 1 and 4 are on, let's see, the intake stroke. I'm mixing my strokes up. What do we got? Intake, compression, power, exhaust. Okay, when these are on the intake strokes, these are on the compression strokes. So whether or not that vacuum is different at that point, I'm not certain. So that's something I'm still trying to figure out. This other vacuum port, normally on most bikes, this is just black, all right, because the pair valve doesn't exist. However, what we're going to do is we're going to connect carb 3, the vacuum port, to this pair valve. Okay? So this is going to pull a vacuum and activate this normally closed valve. Now what this normally closed valve is going to do is it's going to send from here, from the air box, you've got clean air coming in. If this isn't open, say if you take this away, it's closed. It doesn't matter that clean air is coming in. But our pair valve is connected. So right now what we have is 4 independent hoses that go into each one of the exhausts. Okay? So if we have any of these unburnt pieces of fuel here, they'll end up getting burnt because this injects right near the exhaust outlet. So that brings me to this chart that I have. This is the only one I could find, and it's not actually even right for what I'm trying to find because it's got both a manifold and a ported vacuum port on it, but it kind of explains how this works. So one of the things I understand is that as your throttle goes up, which is the yellow here, the vacuum on the ported vacuum out of the carburetor is going to go down. Okay, so let's say I'm riding around on the freeway and then I'm coming to an off-ramp, okay? So the issue is when I let off the throttle a bunch, this is where I can have all of those unburnt gases, or the unburnt fuel air mixture coming through. Well, what happens at this point, this is when that vacuum goes on. Okay, so this is when that pair valve is initiated. This is when it starts injecting all of that fresh air into the exhaust. But the confusing part to me is as soon as we get down to a standard idle, it looks like this pair valve is not initiated. Now this makes sense to me on the pair valve's operation because the pair valve, it sounds like, is designed just to burn. This is one of the things, especially if you put on an aftermarket exhaust, you're going to have a ton of unburnt fuel, and this is where you get all that popping in. Especially if you leave the pair valve on, this is where you end up with all the deceleration popping. And people want to get rid of that, so they end up taking their pair valve off completely. All right, fine, I understand all of that, but it's bringing me back to that vacuum-operated petcock I've got. So, all right, we're not pulling a constant vacuum the whole time. So is that vacuum-operated petcock just always flapping up, you know, open, close, open, close, open, close? Let's say I'm riding along the highway and I'm sitting around here, you know, on my throttle the whole time. I'm just going across. Well, it looks like my pink line here, pink, purple, whatever it is, that's going to go down towards closed and just stay across the whole way. So it seems like that petcock wouldn't deliver fuel to it if you're always staying up high. And what I've read on several different forums as well is that that is actually a thing that happens. I wish I could get a motorcycle diagram that looked like this to actually mimic, you know, what I'm seeing. But I've heard a lot on boat engines or motorcycle engines, people saying that they're going wide open throttle for a good period of time. All of a sudden the engine gets starved of gasoline. And the reason is because it's not pulling a vacuum, because it doesn't pull a vacuum when it's wide open throttle. It pulls vacuum when you're decelerating. So I honestly don't understand why they put these vacuum operated things on there. Maybe because it seems like it's a thing of convenience, like you don't have to change when you park the bike, okay? And then you forget to turn the petcock off or whatever, but I'm a driver that I use my headlights on manual. I don't trust any of those automatic settings. I turn them on and I turn them off every time. I want them on when I'm running and I shut them off when I shut off the thing. That's how I believe that every petcock should be made. This vacuum-operated petcock looks to introduce a whole bunch of issues while solving a little bit of convenience, but it adds another spot of failure. We already found a failure in the one that I've been working on because it was stuck open, so they don't fucking work. So going back to the removal, or you can remove this whole thing. If we wanted to remove the pair valve, what we would need to do, we could take this whole pair valve out. All right? We would have to make up blocks, all right, because there's some metal, not tubing, but metal fixtures that end up delivering this fresh air to the cylinder heads on the exhaust port side. Now, because I don't have those blocks, I'm not going to try doing that. If I decide to buy this bike, I am absolutely going to do that, because these don't need to exist, this fucking pair valve. Because it does, we're going to try just straight up disabling it. For all I know, it's not working correctly. So I just want to disable it. The big thing that we have to do is take this vacuum. We're going to disable the vacuum, which if this thing is normally closed and it's not stuck open, and I don't have any reason to believe it's not stuck open because I don't have a good way of testing it, but we're going to remove that vacuum and we're going to cap carb number 3. Okay, so we're not pulling any vacuum from carb number 3. The only vacuum we're pulling is for the fuel petcock. The other thing that I've been told that you have to do, well, there's one thing on here. I've been told, all right, so let's say we've got our little hose still sticking here. I have been told that I have to cap this. I don't know why I would have to cap this. If this thing only initiates by a vacuum being pulled, but then it's just open to atmosphere, I don't know why it matters that I don't have it capped. Everything I read says I have to cap this. I cannot figure out why I have to cap this. I will, I'll jam a screw down it or whatever. I think a golf tee works. Okay, so I'll cap this thing. That's fine. It's not a problem. I just don't know why I have to. The other thing that you should do, the other thing that this pair valve is hooked up to, is this clean air from the engine. From the airbox. Okay, now again, if this valve is working and it's normally closed, I don't see why I have to cap this. But if this valve is broken or it's stuck open, you absolutely would have to close this, or else this thing's going to be injecting clean air into the exhaust at all times, period, even when it's, not supposed to be. So what I have to do is take this hose off, and I got to find a cap for this. Now, I think you need a much bigger cap for that one. Pretty sure I need something like a marble, or I don't know, a big ass chunk of caulk, because this thing's stupid, so I'm not going to want to go reverse on it anyway. So I need to cap off the vacuum port and the fresh air into it. So even though that this whole thing is still, connected, it can't deliver anything. Even if this valve is broken and it's stuck open, doesn't matter because it can't get any fresh air. So that's what I'm going to look to do. The last thing that I noticed on this bike is from the carburetors. There should be 2 breather hoses. And these are breathers for the float bowls. And I didn't see any. Actually, all I saw was this T, and there was just nothing coming off of it. So basically, these breathers, they don't connect to anything. They just kind of run along and they kind of lay by the battery. So if it's not raining or these things aren't, going to be picking up dirt or anything like that, it doesn't matter that they're not on. It's not affecting it. But if you're any bit worried that you could end up getting, shit inside of these, definitely I'm going to find some kind of hose to put on these. I just haven't found, I don't even know what to search for. Bulk breather hose has not been bringing me the right things. I could probably use any type of hose because these shouldn't be seeing a whole lot of material coming through them ever outside of air. But I'll get those replaced. Here's a fun thing I didn't know about until recently. So this little hose right here with the cap on the end of it, this runs up into the air box, okay? It's just connected as a sort of overflow to the air box. What this thing ends up doing is collecting all the crap that ends up into the air box. And I just opened this a little bit to see if there's anything in it, and there absolutely is, and it looks like oil. So I'm going to try to get this back off and show you, because I think you're supposed to drain these things at the end of every year, and I've never even heard of them. This kind of sucks to do with one hand. Oof. Come on. Okay. 1 second. I'm gonna get it. Alright, anyway, that's what it looks like. That's oil. Now, I'll have to do some thinking on why that's coming out of here, but that's not a small amount. That absolutely fills up this whole hose. The bottom part of this air box. So, just one more variable into this whole experiment to trying to figure out how to make this thing work. Alright, so we got the tank off. Pretty straightforward. And I've actually just found a new issue, but let's go over how ridiculous this pair valve is. So this is the pair valve itself, right here. And I believe on each side, so you've got 4 hoses coming out of it. These are the 4 that end up going to the cylinders. So, might be tough, but this is where they end up coming in. So if you wanted to remove this, you need to put block-off plates across each one of these 4. So that's where the pair injects the clean air. All right, but coming back, so this is our pair valve right here. Now this has 2 things coming from it. One, this vacuum line right here. This is what should go to, sorry, I'm trying to point to it, right there. That's a port, that's a vacuum port. Right now I have a cap on it. So right now this is disconnected, and as I mentioned, I'm going to block this off on the end of it. Okay, so the other open port on card number 4 is sitting right there. That's for the fuel petcock. That's still on the tank, so that will be connected. Now, what's interesting is I just noticed there's 2 more breather hoses missing than I thought. The 2 that I had mentioned previously are on the carburetors. Where are they sitting? Oh boy. Oh, there's one. Okay. Right in there. Get out of here, hose. Okay, there's a... Sorry, it's tough for me to show it. Anyway, there's one in there. Actually, right down here should be easier. See that little black cap right there? Right there. So there's one right there, and there's one on that side. And those should just have breathers that come and lay just somewhere over here. Now, the other 2 breathers that are missing are actually supposed to be connected to the tank. They don't exist. So, right here, I can remember I've been in here before. I wrote these last year. There's an overflow. And see this bullshit? This just shouldn't happen. This is the problem with these fucking vacuum-operated petcocks. It shouldn't fucking drip. Anyway, there's supposed to be a fuel overflow and an air breather. Okay, so when fuel comes out of this tank, the air breather has to replace it. So right now, I mean, it's still gonna work. Okay, the fuel overflow is just gonna dump right onto the top of it if it happens to overflow. Let's say if you park somewhere for a while and the pressure starts building up or whatever, it's just gonna start pouring oil or fuel right onto the engine. And that air intake, the air breather, it should just be routed away so it grabs air somewhere from atmosphere, you know, that's not right over the tank. But again, those won't actually affect performance at this point, but it's something I need to address. So there's actually 4 basically breather hoses that are missing from this bike. The other part, and why I started shooting this video, is because here's where we got our air box, and this line here, follow it up, it goes up, it's this line, okay? This is what goes into the pair. What's very interesting is I just showed you I dumped a bunch of oil out of that little guy. I just tucked him back in. Well, this entire air box must have been full of oil, because when I pull this off, I'm gonna see some bullshit. Yeah, there it is. Oh, come on. So, that's supposed to be clean air. That sure as shit isn't clean air. So, my air box has been full of oil. And Now we've just basically got to assume the pair is fucked, because this isn't good. I mean, just look at this. This is all the oil that came out of the air box. That's not a small amount at all. Now how does that much get in there? Now remember, this thing was overflowed with fuel because of float bolts, but this stuff is thick. All right, this stuff isn't the same as that fuel oil mixture we were looking at before. This is, we got some dirt in there, but again, I didn't clean this out before I dumped it in, so we got some crap, but this is thicker than that fuel air mixture. The big thing I'm thinking is, where is it? All right, right here. All right, this is a breather from the valve cover, okay? So this right here connects there. All right, that's into this same air box. That same air box that just dumped all that bullshit out. That's the only other one that I believe comes into the air box. So I'm going to guess, just because I don't have a better guess at this point, that that's where that oil came from. How it got there, I don't know. I can't rule out that it's related to the fact that we had just an entire crankcase full of fuel though. So if we did, let's just say that the fucking fuel oil mixture was up to here, just kept splashing shit all the way through, and it came down, and then it ends up in the air box. And there's a good chance that this thing has never been emptied in. Where's that one go? Oh, hold on. One more. All right. Ah, shit. Oh, where's my flashlight? Okay, one more. You see that? Right there. Light's right on it. I was wondering where the crankcase. No, that's not the crankcase breather. That's the drain tube. Okay. Where's the crankcase breather? I feel like there should be a crankcase breather. I mean, I get that the valve cover breather's right there, but I don't see the crankcase breather. I don't know, I'll keep looking, but point is, this whole thing was full of oil. Now, how that affected this thing's operation, I'm not positive. It may have just made it not work at all, but it just dumped everything out, so who knows? I'll try running it. Actually, yeah, it's not too late to run this. It's only Sunday. Yes, everybody's off work tomorrow. We're gonna run this for a little bit. Let's see what happens. All right, so in this configuration, what we're gonna actually do, we're gonna try running it with the pair set up correctly, which means I've got vacuum to port 3, and I've capped off the fuel petcock because that's sitting over there. So that's port 4. I've got it hooked up to this auxiliary tank right here, and well, this should work as the bike is intended. The clean air, the one that was full of oil, is hooked up to the pair, and we're just gonna see what happens. Probably got a little while to run it. I think it's about 7:15. They can't get that mad yet. All right, let's give it a start. See if we have that wandering idle for a bit. Whoop. Man, just a little bit changes it a lot. Let's see right here. Now, still trying to figure out the source of all that smoke. Now, a lot of that will be from the choke. There's unburned gas in it, but I'm wondering if it also has to do with that air box being full. See, it's going way up on its own. I'm barely touching it. This seems okay though. see any major issues yet. Just gonna keep getting it warm. I'm not gonna ride it tonight. I've been in the bush light, so not a good idea. A little bit of gas kills it. This issue when I had the pair valve disconnected, so I'm going to see if disconnecting that fixes anything. So what's interesting now is I can't put any throttle on it or it just dies. And I was able to ride this the other day. So right now I do have the pair vacuum disabled, and that's it. Actually, what happens if I just... Yeah, I don't feel anything on the pair vacuum. I didn't figure I would, but if I give it any throttle, it dies. So I don't know if it's a matter of not getting enough fuel to the bowls, if they just starve immediately. But it ran better when I had the fuel tank on it. And now that I don't have the tank on it, it doesn't seem to be doing the exact same thing. So I don't know. I guess we're going to have to play around with this thing with and without the pair valve on. I'm going to figure out a good way to actually block off the pair valve. I don't have a good way to block it off, so just running this auxiliary tank for now just to see the idle. I mean, that's great and all, but I'd like to see how it actually runs, you know, when it gets, you know, adequate fuel pressure to it. So I think that's going to be it for today. I didn't solve anything. Actually, I just added more variables to the problem, but I actually thought I'd have a good chance at actually just seeing it run all right like this, but it seemed like anytime I got any throttle on it, no matter if I had the pair valve connected or disconnected, any throttle would just kill the engine, period. So, I mean, we're going to see what tomorrow brings, but when I had the tank on it, it must have had a little bit more pressure in it. I mean, I was able to ride around the neighborhood, and as soon as I got up into gear 2 and 3, I was able to run all right. I just figured my issue was with the low RPMs and, you know, having it down low, but this is where we're at, so I'm going to disconnect the auxiliary. I'll figure out a good way to block the pair. Now, I have a good way to block the vacuum port on it. That's easy enough. I just didn't have a good way to actually block the air valve. Now, we took a ton of oil out of the air box, which is kind of crazy, but I mean, it's not there anymore, so hopefully that's not causing the issue. I don't know, getting closer, maybe. But just finding more and more issues.